Welcome to another broadcast from MindYourHealthcast.com. As I'm sure you're aware, if you have been watching any of my previous videos, that every week we put up a new video in covering some aspect of the health field, past, present, and maybe future. We haven't said so much about the future things yet, but one of the programs I will be talking about the anti-aging issue and some of the future things. I think we brought it up before, but I don't recall having done a total broadcast just on some of the future aspects of health and what we might be able to expect, depending on a lot of things, of course. Now, today we are going to do a book review. Now, I occasionally have presented various books along the way. I'm sure you're aware of that. One pair of books that I have mentioned over and over, whether or not it's caught or not, and whether or not you have gotten them or read them, both by the same author. His name is James Oschman, O-S-C-H-M-A-N. He has a PhD, a science of research degree. Now, I may not be saying that right because I haven't seen the actual document as to how it's worded, but I do know he has a PhD, and I do know his specialty is research. So, back along the way, he had heard all this information out there about alternative medicine and heard all of the rebut. There's no evidence, there's no science behind it, which if you were to read this book that I'm going to present today, you'll hear that same cry. We're just interested in science. We want to see the science behind it. So Dr. Oschman spent a long time researching all of the traditional research literature. Now, we're not talking about opinions, and we're not talking about some research done by a vitamin company. We're talking about independent medical research and university research done over the years. And interestingly, when he put it all together, he filled up a couple of books of the research of all the various types of therapies and ideas of natural medicine and what they call alternative medicine. I have to say, if there's probably one statement made by the author of this book that we're going to talk about, if he only really believed that in practice, we probably would not have any issues. It ends up, he said, that there's no such thing as alternative medicine. Everything that's scientific is medicine, and if it's not medicine. And I would agree, this whole term of alternative, complementary, all those types of terms, really, they aren't necessary. It's true that medicine is medicine in the sense that if it helps actually improve your health. Now, there is a big difference, however, in saying that medicine improves your health or it actually just covers over a symptom, allowing you to grow sicker. Now, I'm sure that wasn't what he was thinking about when he made the comment. But at any rate, Dr. Oschman's books are very detailed. The first one is called, what he called it is energy medicine. Because if you get into a lot of the natural approaches, you'll find they talk a lot about energy and the body energy and improving the energy, etc., etc. So he referred to this whole group of things as energy medicine. And the first book was called Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis. And he has all these studies done by traditional researchers using, quote, the scientific method, and was able to demonstrate that all these things that have been poo-pooed do in fact have a scientific background. He wrote the second volume called Energy Medicine in Therapeutics and Human Performance. And so he went even a little farther. But that's not the only one out there. There's books by William Tiller that I've mentioned before that goes into some areas that may be more difficult to deal with, but in fact very good. And I've mentioned others before that have done research since even Dr. Oshman's books have come out, but today that's not going to be our subject. The subject of today is a review of a book called Do You Believe in Magic? Now, just in recent times, he was being interviewed on one of the television networks, the author of this book, and it prompted me from some statements that he made to get the book and really look into it. It's kind of an interesting book. It says, Do You Believe in Magic? The Sense and Nonsense of Alternative Medicine. The author is Paul A. Offit, O-F-F-I-T, M.D. I was sure that many people, from what he said, probably have bought the book, and we're going to read it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what he has to say and basically how scientific his comments are. Now, as many of you know, that I have in the last 2-3 years or more, not that I haven't studied right along, but made a really concentrated study of the history of medicine, health, diet, food, soil, etc. for at least 200 years. But I've actually investigated specific individuals and theories of medicine that go back actually hundreds and, in a few cases, thousands of years. So it's not that I haven't been looking at history. I have, and I've known of a lot of things that have been taught and have happened. I've known a lot of things that have come and gone. Even within the medical field, I've watched pronouncements that absolutely something could not work or be true, only later to have the evidence come along to show that it could be true, and in fact was true and did work. But medicine has been big on this for a long time, and what they really have done, if you go back a couple hundred years and watch the progression, as they grew more powerful and had more money to spend, they solidified their position more and more by trying to knock down, wipe out, destroy any competition that would interfere with their field. Now, and then, of course, as the pharmaceutical business grew and the profit grew, they became more powerful. They were able to influence, I wouldn't say buy off, they were able to influence favorable legislation for them and the exclusiveness of their approach as opposed to other approaches to helping people get well. The unfortunate thing, as we've talked about, is that standard drugs, in most cases, it's never, ever a good idea. That's the only time I would say never. Never a good idea to think that something has no exceptions, or that the statement you're making includes everything, everywhere, for all time, because that's not true. We many times can only make statements based on the available evidence at the time. As we've talked before about scientific method, that actually, even though you have a scientific hypothesis down the road and a working theory that seems to work pretty well, down the road a new piece of information can totally turn it around, such as happened with physics. And so I'm not saying that there's never an occasion you might need surgery. There could be. That there's never an occasion that you might, for a very short period of time, need some powerful pharmaceutical medicament. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I'm saying that probably in about 99.99% of the cases, you likely won't need it. I mean, as far as it actually getting you better or improving your health or making you well. Now, it's true that there's a lot of drugs out there that in a very short period of time can wipe out your awareness of a symptom. What it does is it shuts off certain informational circuits in your body, and therefore you don't feel the symptom. Does that mean you're better? No. Does it mean that your health is improved in any way? No. What it means is you've been made temporarily more comfortable, but that does not mean that you're healthier. And so when you really get to looking into medicine, you begin to look at it from that standpoint. Okay. And it can be true of herbs. See, I don't defend natural medicine just for the sake of defending it, because there can be a misuse of everything. And this author uses the term megadoses of vitamins. Now, he doesn't really define what he means by that. He says megadoses, which is covering his butt, but he doesn't define megadoses, so he kind of leaves it hanging. Now, if he's talking about, which could be the possibility, although I don't recall him saying that in here, anything over the governmental recommended RDAs would be megadosing. But I'm not sure. He also doesn't define when he talks about a study relating to vitamin E and not only not being beneficial, but could in fact lead to health problems. He does not define what he means by vitamin E. Now, I know it's a general practice within medicine to consider that there's one fraction of a natural vitamin as it occurs in nature that's the active ingredient, and that then all the rest of it is unnecessary or unimportant. They also tend to believe that a synthetic vitamin is the same as one derived from a natural source. I personally do not believe that's true, and I think vitamin E is one of those situations. Now, I'm just giving you some pre-stuff about the book, but I'm going to let him talk in just a minute from some of the comments he makes. I know, first of all, reading the book, that it's a prejudicial book meant to scare, influence, dissuade you from looking into alternative medicine without really providing anything what I call factual, and offering sources where you can go to look for yourself. He makes broad sweeping statements, generalized, and in many cases either leaving out key pieces of information and or making prejudicial statements with no backing. You know, like, well, scientific studies have disproved, but he doesn't give me those scientific studies. I think that it's, in a sense, a bit on the dishonest side, to say the least, whether intentional or unintentional. Maybe that's the way he thinks, and therefore he believes that because he's Dr. Offit, you should just take it at his comment as a fact and let it go at that. I don't believe that. Everything I'm telling you, I want you to search out. It's like going to Wikipedia. You understand that there, the statements all posted on there are posted by people, and it's not what I would call authoritative. Now, if you want to know how the birth and death of somebody, that's pretty straightforward, and it's likely you're going to get good information. But I'm convinced that there are medical people whose job it is to continue to go on Wikipedia and alter all of those notations to favor medicine and to poo-poo anything that contradicts it. Because even, I've read so many of them, they'll say, well, this is what blah, 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 but, and then they come along and make a broad sweeping statement that wipes out the validity of what they've just said. In other words, they're saying, well, this is what these people thought, but in reality, blah, blah, is true. And so you have to watch Wikipedia as being a source as far as solid facts. It could be that somebody has put solid information, and I think when it's non-emotional material, like straight chemistry or straight physics, in most cases it could be valid, but what a lot of people don't know, even within the realm of physics and chemistry, there are disagreements, and there are areas that are not absolutely solidly clear. And I'm saying also to say you need to keep an open mind, and you need to look at what they're not saying, not just at what they're saying. So as I've gone through this book, I've made some notations, and I find it interesting, especially when he says, he's inferring right off in the title, do you believe in magic? Well, and then right under that he says, the sense and nonsense of alternative medicine. Okay, that right off tells me this book is meant to dissuade you from bothering to look at alternative medicine. Now, in the flyleaf back, it says that this Dr. Paul A. Offit is chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases and director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital at Philadelphia. Okay, right off, that tells me he's probably got an agenda. And as I've read through the book, I mean, sure enough, that's what's happened. He refers to some different researchers and their work, but tells it in a way to, in essence, be poo-pooing them and putting them down. And it's not that the information isn't out there, because some of the, and pretty much everything I've recall that he's brought up in here, I'm aware of and have studied all of the material about it, all the background. And when I print things out on the internet that are favorable to the person as well as not favorable, and then look as to what they really say. For example, one of the sources I went to about him and his work and background was by a defender of his, a site that defends medicine against any type of alternative intrusions. And so they're saying that this poor man has been ostracized and criticized and mistreated unjustly. In everything that I've been able to find out, I would say they've probably been kind to him in light of some of the stuff that's showing up. I believe he has a special interest, and it's interesting to me that throughout the book, every time he talks about anything to do with what he calls alternative medicine, he refers to, well, they make money off of it. Oh, well, some of the things you're going to see about him, I think that I would be very hesitant to infer that other people make some money out of things. And we'll talk about that. I'll try to, if the time permits, about that, but I think we'll make it okay. Talk about special interest and talk about profiting out of the special interest and leading people to think that he's only interested in the welfare of people. Now, another thing he does, of course, is in the field of logic. Logic is hardly taught anymore. But there is a way of logically thinking, and it's a discipline that you have to spend time learning. It comes out of the realm of philosophy. There's one branch of philosophy that has to do with logic. And there's terms for various fallacies of logic. And one of them is called poisoning the wells. I mean, if you have somebody make an argument, you can't answer the argument, you attack the person and make them seem to be a disreputable person, and since they're a disreputable person, then of course you certainly can't believe anything they have to say. And that is a way of getting around a direct answer that somebody makes. And so there's a lot of poisoning the wells in here, and there's a lot of deliberate deletion of information that makes a totally different picture that I happen to know because I have gone and researched it myself, and I have the facts, one in particular, a Dr. Wakefield that he mentions in his book. And I'll read you what he says, and then I'll tell you what I know, in fact, that I have the material, and you can get it too. If you do your research, you can get the same material. It's out there. But he's smearing him. Why? Because he was suggesting, and probably believes by now, although he doesn't state it as a research fact because he hasn't researched it to the degree it should be, but there's indications, and that's what he published, that there is suggestion that there could be a problem of a certain issue, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I thought I could really spend the whole broadcast just on the prologue to this book. And I'm trying to figure out where he's going with this, because the prologue says, taking a look at alternative medicine. So I'm figuring in this prologue, he's going to go through a lot of spiel about alternative medicine. And of course, his first line is, Americans love alternative medicine. They go to their acupuncturist or chiropractor or naturopath to relieve pain. They take ginkgo for memory or homeopathic remedies for the flu or megavitamins. Again, he never does define what he means by megavitamins. For energy, or Chinese herbs for potency, or Indian spices to boost their immune system. 50% of Americans use some form of alternative medicine. 10% use it on their children. It's a $34 billion a year business. Now, that's the first place he kind of throws this money thing in. And you'll find that every time he talks about something, and he says, well, they make some money off of that. But when you hear some of the things that I'm going to mention about him, that I didn't say it, but I was able to find it on the internet, and from some pretty good sources. Again, you know, you always have to look at all the sources, pro and con, and then you have to weigh what they're all saying, and then look to see if there's any substantiation to what they're saying before you can decide, well, is this guy right or this guy right? Anyhow, it's a $34 billion a year practice or business. And he said, my friends are no different. So, okay. Then he goes down and starts to do some criticizing of his own profession. So I'm not sure, because a good share of this prologue has to do with his personal experience with his own colleagues. He says, hospitals have dietary supplements on their formulary, or offer Reiki, as some people say, masters to cancer patients, or teach medical students how to manipulate healing energies. In 2010, a survey of 6,000 hospitals found that 42% offered some form of alternative therapies. When asked why, almost all responded, patient demand. Now see, when I read that, it raises a question in my mind. Are the hospitals then saying that as long as people want it, they'll provide it, even if they don't think it's good or could even be harmful? So he's actually, I say, pronouncing an indictment on the hospitals. And then he goes to the big pharma. Big pharma is also jumping on, or in. On February 27, 2012, Pfizer acquired Alistair Corporation, one of the country's largest manufacturers of megavitamins. Again, he uses the term megavitamins without definition. And so, when I first started the book, I'm thinking, is this against alternative medicine? Is it for regular medicine? Is it against all medicine? Or is it against everything that he doesn't think? And so that's what I've tried to ascertain from reading his book. So, okay, so we go a little bit further. He said when he was born, he had club feet. Within hours, both feet were put in casts. The left foot healed, the right foot didn't. When I was 5 years old, a surgical procedure was performed on my right foot, one of the first of its kind. My case was later written up in a medical journal. The good news is that my right foot no longer turns awkwardly down and inward. The bad news is that walking is almost always somewhat painful for me. So then he goes on to say that at somewhere down the road, when he was 25, he made a 25-mile walk, and he had a lot of problems. So he says, I visited an orthopedist who told me I had severe osteoarthritis and that my x-ray looked like that of a 70-year-old man. Now, I believe at this point he was in his 20s. Yeah, I was 24. For most of my adult life, I tried conventional non-narcotic pain medicines without relief. relief. Okay, so that kind of ends the story about his foot issue and his leg issue, except later his knee. When I was in my 30s, I noticed that a small black spot, or dark spot, no bigger than the head of a pin, on the front of my nose. I ignored it, and 12 years later my wife suggested I have it removed. The procedure was fast and painless, but a few days later the dermatologist called with some bad news. He had received a report from the pathologist. Now here, these are expert medical people trained in regular medicine. The diagnosis, metastatic malignant melanoma, a death sentence. I panicked and immediately called the pathologist. This diagnosis doesn't make any sense. But the doctor insisted the diagnosis was correct. Then, of course, if it's metastatic, it means it probably came from someplace else, and so he spent some time trying to find that, which nobody could find. And so this pathologist suggested that he have another opinion. So he goes to another one who was the nation's foremost expert on melanoma, a dermatopathologist, in New York City. A few weeks later, he called with his diagnosis, metastatic malignant melanoma. Okay, so now he said for 2 years that he's in a big upheaval. He's gone through all kind of tests, x-rays, examinations, blood tests, etc., looking for what's causing this. None were found. So later, his wife, who was also a doctor, sent my biopsy to a dermatologist friend of hers who said I didn't have malignant melanoma. My real diagnosis was cutaneous blue nevus syndrome, a benign disorder that mimics melanoma. I was happy to be done with it, but 2 years of thinking that I was suffering from a fatal illness had been hell. Now, what he suggested here about going to a properly trained doctor, that's exactly what he was doing, yet he's getting the same thing that most patients get that I have come in to see me, who have been to 6 doctors and gotten 6 different opinions, and all contradicting each other, all offering a different type of treatment. And for the first time in their life, they realized that medicine is not as cut and dried as they used to think it was. So he said, when I was in my early 50s, a sharp, persistent pain was in my left knee, which I mentioned earlier, made it difficult to walk. So he finally went to an orthopedist who diagnosed a partially torn medial meniscus, the cartilage in the knee that keeps bone from rubbing against bone. He said the surgery would be simple and he'd be recovered in a few days. However, the orthopedist explained after the surgery that my problem wasn't a torn meniscus after all. It was a loss of cartilage behind my kneecap. Instead of a minor knee surgery, I had just undergone microfracture surgery where small holes are drilled into the bone. The recovery wasn't going to be a few days, it was going to be a year. Okay, so he was he was kind of displeased with that. He says it upset me. By the mid-50s, consistent with my age, I began to suffer symptoms of an enlarged prostate. Now I was in the world of urologists, which meant I would periodically get my PSA level tested. PSA, or prostate-specific antigen, is supposedly a predictor of prostate cancer. But the more I read studies about PSA, the more I realized it isn't a very good predictor at all. Even biopsy of the prostate are confusing. Now, how many people go through surgeries, have radiation treatments, have all kinds of chemotherapy, etc., based on a test that's propagated, and here he's saying when he really looked into it, it was not necessarily a predictor at all, and that even a biopsy wasn't necessarily conclusive, which I've told people before. You know, a biopsy is really ultimately an opinion of somebody looking at the cells and determining, are they healthy, are they dysplasic, or are they malignant? And sometimes the line between dysplasia and malignant is very difficult to ascertain, as I found out personally, not for myself, but from a patient when I recommended they get another opinion. They ended up getting 2 more opinions, and they got 3 answers from 3 national specialists. So everything is not so cut and dried. And why am I emphasizing this? I'm saying it's your body, your health. Don't be so rapid to jump in and do something radical that cannot be reversed until you have taken some time to look into it more. Now, here's another interesting statement he makes, which it says, as it turns out, most men with prostate cancer die with the cancer, not from it. Now, what does that mean? It means the cancer does not what really ends up killing them at all. So if they did nothing, it probably wouldn't change much of anything. Now, that's his comment, not mine. But I'm going to refer to this later when we talk about another individual that he criticizes and makes a broad sweeping statement without any clarification, but is meant to mislead you into thinking something that he wants you to think by the way he says it. And he says, which means, now this is his statement, not mine, which means that most men with prostate cancer have needless surgery. And the surgery is brutal, leaving many incontinent and impotent. As a consequence, urologists have varying opinions about how to avoid prostate cancer. So then he goes through talking about that. But then finally, as he's gone through all of his own health issues, he gets down to talking a little bit about alternative. This is at the end almost of the prologue. So I was waiting for him to talk about taking a look at alternative medicine, but we took more of a look at traditional medicine from his own experiences. And even he does mention at some point his friends suggested he might do some natural things, and of course it was a generalized statement, not specific to him, and he didn't realize anything from that either. So I guess he's concluding that all medicine to some degree is bunk, the way he makes the comments. So I'm concluding from all that probably he is the only one that knows what the real answer is, and probably the rest of the world, both traditional and alternative, is a bit on the confused side. But here now he's getting back to alternative medicine. He says, perhaps most convincing or concerning, I found alternative therapies could be quite harmful. Chiropractic, now here, again, broad sweeping statements, no evidence, no place to go to find out. If you can look it up yourself. Chiropractic manipulations have torn arteries, causing permanent paralysis. Now, I personally have not heard of that. I'm not saying it couldn't possibly happen, but I haven't heard of it. And I've known a lot of chiropractors over years and years, and I've taught many programs to chiropractors, and I haven't known of that happening. It's possible. Now, I've heard an old wives' tale passed around by medical doctors when they were trying to discourage people from going to chiropractors to make statements like that. Either, well, chiropractors only go to school 16 weeks, or they don't have any real medical training, or you can't believe how many times I've been in an emergency room and people were brought in with a broken neck because of a chiropractor, and basically almost none of that's true. I'm not saying in some rare, unusual case that it couldn't happen, but how many malpractice problems come from regular medicine? How many people are injured by regular medicine? How many people have the wrong limb amputated? How many people have the wrong organ extracted? I mean, when you get down to it, yeah, you're going to find an isolated case somewhere where somebody, either by error or incompetence, created a problem. But as I had an attorney tell me one time, true malpractice is very rare and very difficult to prove. Now, sometimes if you make it very emotional, when it involves a child, if it's presented in the right way and provokes enough empathy from a jury, you could get a malpractice settlement in a case where it wasn't really due, because after all, everybody's going to feel sorry that this child died, and that's true. It is a problem, but that doesn't mean that somebody deliberately or incompetently injured the child. But nonetheless, that's a difficult one. So anyhow, he says, yeah, chiropractic manipulations have torn arteries, causing permanent paralysis. Acupuncture needles have caused serious viral infections. or ended up in lungs. Now, I've been in the field of orthodontic for almost 40 years. Nobody that I know has ever had that happen. I do know of one case where a medical doctor used a hollow hypodermic needle to try to do acupuncture with, for which he had not been trained, and did pass on a virus with that hollow needle because it contained some blood from the previous person, and he never sterilized the needle properly. Or it ended up in lungs. Now, he cites a case, I don't know about it, but supposedly one of the Chinese leaders at some point ended up with an acupuncture needle in his lung. That's possible. I mean, I'm not discounting that it couldn't happen, but it didn't happen here. It happened to happen in China, where they're supposed to be the world's best. But if it did happen, it did happen. I'm not saying there couldn't be an isolated case. But then he said livers or hearts. Now, I have trouble with that. I have never known of anybody getting an acupuncture needle in their liver or their heart, or even coming close to it. But nonetheless, I'm open. A case isolated could happen. Does it happen as a practice or a rule? No. Do surgeons, as a rule, cut off the wrong leg? No. It's isolated. Am I saying the surgeon's no good because they cut off the wrong leg? No. He may have been careless in paying attention to where he was supposed to be removing a leg, but could be extenuating circumstances from that. I don't know. So I don't really pass judgment. I just know when you're dealing with humankind with all kind of problems, eventually some bad set of circumstances can come together and create a problem. But I have to say it's more the exception than the rule. Okay, he says dietary supplements. Oh, here we are. Have caused bleeding, psychosis, liver dysfunction, heart arrhythmias, seizures, brain swelling, and some megavitamins have been found to actually increase the risk of cancer. Now that's what he says at the end of the prologue. But he says, my experience was limited to reading medical journals. Well, you know, I feel comfort in that. I'm sure that the medical journals would not exaggerate or maybe distort a bit the facts if they're trying to discourage their competition. As head of the Therapeutic Standards Committee at our hospital, I learned of one child who suffered severe pancreatitis after taking more than 90 different dietary supplements. If that's true, that somebody gave a child 90 different supplements, I would say that is, it certainly wasn't because the vitamins were bad or a problem. It was because somebody had poor sense in overloading a child with a huge load of vitamins, if that's the case. I don't know of it, but that's what he's saying. And another whose patients or parents insisted on using an alternative cancer cure made from human urine. Well, I know that case, but I don't know if that's too much different than producing a hormone for women made from pregnant mare's urine, which Premarin is, so I'm not so sure that I might want a human urine as opposed to a horse urine, but I don't know. Anyhow, those are the kind of statements I'm talking about that he gets started off with. He kind of throws these comments out there without any substantiation, without any clarification, but leaves it hang there hoping it's going to scare you away. What I learned in all of this was that although conventional therapies can be disappointing, I would say more than disappointing, alternative therapies shouldn't be given a free pass, and I don't think anybody suggests that. The purpose of this book is to take a critical look at the field of alternative medicine to separate fact from myth. And then that's when he makes his statement, which I would kind of agree with, because the truth is there is no such thing as conventional alternative or complementary integrative or holistic medicine. There's only medicine that works and medicine that doesn't. And the best way to sort it out is by carefully evaluating scientific studies, not by visiting internet chat rooms, reading magazine articles, or talking to friends. Now, I can agree with that. However, I would want to make sure of the studies that I consulted to make sure they were in fact good studies done scientifically and not anecdotal, whether for or against something. And sometimes that's hard to find because sometimes it isn't there. I know they started doing heart bypass surgery and there was never any previous studies done. They just started doing it. And there's a lot of procedures that medicine does that never had any previous studies, contrary to them saying that they're scientific. But you can go, again, look that up for yourself. See what the pre-studies were on bypass surgery before they started doing it. A lot of procedures that are done, because surgery isn't really regulated by the FDA. In fact, it isn't really regulated by anybody. And so they do all kinds of strange things in surgery, some helpful and maybe some not so helpful. Okay, so I've kind of given you an introduction to the book. I want to look at some specific issues, but time-wise, we've already gone beyond our time. So it would appear that this is going to be a two-broadcast subject. And of course, the subject is the review of Do You Believe in Magic? So, go to our website, look up mindyourhealthcast.com, look through our pages, go to my alternative health and prevention website, which you can connect directly from mindyourhealthcast.com, and keep watching our broadcasts and send other people to our broadcasts, and hopefully we can give you some pieces of information that may be helpful in your own pursuit of your own health and happiness. Until next time, be healthy.